Okay, so we were expecting 54 or just a little over 50 people, so I might give it another couple minutes to see if people show up before we actually get started. On attendait plus que 50, alors je vais attendre quelques minutes pour m'assurer qu'on a tous qui vont participer. All right, so thank you for joining us. Just before we turn it over to Martin for an introduction and a welcome, I just want to quickly go through the method for asking a question. So we're going to wait until after all the whole presentation has happened to do questions, but you've got two options for questions. If you look at the slides right now, you can see that there's a way to expand the pane for the webinar. That will let you enter a question in the questions box, if that's the way you want to do. Alternatively, you can raise your hand at the question period, and I will sort of do my best to moderate questions in the order that I see hands go up. And that is with the hand raising icon you see there. Alors, pour poser une question, on peut entrer dans la boîte de questions ou on peut lever la main. Je vais attendre, on va attendre les questions jusqu'au fin de la présentation. Pour les collègues francophones, si vous voulez poser votre question en français, quelqu'un va traduire pour vous pour assurer que nos présentateurs comprennent, et puis on va traduire la réponse aussi. Alors, I will pass it to Martin. Thank you very much. So Martin, do you want to go ahead? Uh-oh. Connection has been lost. Yeah, okay. Okay, Martin, would you go ahead?
Yes, I will go ahead. Thanks, you've unmuted me now. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Martin Taylor, the Executive Director of the Canadian Research Data Centre Network, and we're really grateful for you taking an hour out of your day to join us, both as academic directors across the country and as various members of our university research finance staff. We recognise that we've got a nice problem in that the CRDCN has been funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation and also by the two councils, the Social Science Humanities Research Council and the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. Both require us, as you know, to provide detailed information on how we have spent money on an annual basis. And so we're going to, over the next half an hour, take you through some of the essentials of the financial reporting requirements. And I'm going to be assisted in that by Jennifer Mains, who is the Senior Research Accountant here at McMaster University, together with Dave Reinhardt, who is Director of Research, Finance and Administration. And I want to acknowledge the wonderful support that they are providing through McMaster as the host institution for our network. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it to Jennifer, and she will take us through a series of slides that will outline the basic financial reporting requirements for the funds that we report on annually back to our funding agencies. Jennifer, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, so in the upcoming slides, we'll be discussing reporting due for our two funding agencies, Tri-Council and CFI. Your 2018-19 allocations would have been communicated to you last summer, and you will see an example of this letter that was sent then in an upcoming slide. The tri-agency, SSHRC and CHR funding that has been dispersed to 14 partner institutions, reporting will be due via the Form 300 to McMaster on April 30th, 2019, for the fiscal year of 2018-19 being April 1st, 2018 to March 31st, 2019. The second reporting we require is the CFI MSI award that funds are remitted to each institution upon the submission of their claim. Reported to McMaster using the Schedule D reporting template, which we received from over the 30 plus institutions for the period of April 1st, 2018 to March 31st, 2019, due no later than May 1st, 2019. The SSHRC and CHR funds are dispersed annually, and similar to years before, SSHRC and CHR Form 300 reporting will be due April 30th, as per your letter of agreement for the fund transfer of funds. This reporting is extremely important in determining allocations for future years, as well as consolidating to show a full financial picture to the CRDCN Finance Committee and Board of Directors. If you have any questions about this Form 300 reporting, you can contact myself, Jennifer Mains. And then next we have a full snapshot of the approximate $16.9 million CFI MSI budget. This is showing in the first column the 2017-18 actuals from last year's submission to CFI, along with the budget figures for 2018-19, and in subsequent years the profiled forecasted values approved by the CFI this past fall in 2018. So these figures are consolidated from all of your submissions of the Schedule D reporting template of both CFI cash and institutional contributions. As you can see from this slide, our first year, we did not receive a complete picture of reporting from all of you, and therefore we were underspent, causing us to have to forecast a little more heavily into subsequent years. So we do stress that this year, everyone please spend to full budget for both their CFI cash and institutional contributions. Okay, next slide. The sources of funding on the left of your screen include institutional contributions, provincial contributions, in-kind from corporations, user fees, and CFI cash. So you'll see the actuals as reported to CFI for 2017-18. Please note, as I've mentioned on the previous slide, we did not receive a full reporting picture from every institution, some not reporting and others underreporting. Therefore, our percentage of contributions that CFI supported was greater than what they normally would at about 41%. For this fiscal year, reporting 2018-19, we ask that you please report to your full budget. Many institutions had questions on what to report here. All expenses must be eligible expenditures as per the MSI Oversight Framework document found on the CFI website. With regards specifically to the $1.148 million of institutional contributions, we must report to CFI. All of the 30 institutions, including McMaster, are responsible for a portion of this institutional match. So the amount that your institution is responsible for may be a little unclear right now, but we're working to send out a separate communication in the upcoming weeks with your allocation. Again, as you see from this slide, We do stress that you please report expenses and contributions to meet your full budgeted amount, and especially your institutional contributions, as we were short in our contributions last year. Last September, the academic directors were sent their annual allocations for the MSI and CHR budget, if applicable. We have included a copy of this letter for your reference. As noted in the letter, your Schedule D CFI MSI reporting was set to be due no later than May 15th. However, we have revised this date, and please ask everyone to submit no later than May 1st, as it does take quite some time to consolidate 30-plus reports for CFI's deadline of June 15th. So as per the past letter you just saw, as well as calculated in your Schedule D reporting spreadsheet that you also received, here are just a list of categories of expenses and how the percentage breakdown was. As per the letter you received and the MSI Oversight Framework document found on the CFI website, there are some examples listed as to what types of eligible expenditures you can report in these sections. We ask that if you have any questions or concerns about spending in a particular category, that you contact us first and explain what this might be for prior approval, as there is limited flexibility between line deviation. And now Dave is just going to speak a little bit about the Statistics Canada eligibility.
Thank you, Jennifer. So just to speak to the StatsCan bill and its eligibility, because it is a significant expense across all the institutions. And we have received a few questions about its eligibility for the MSI project. Now, doing a little bit of homework here, I do understand that there was quite a discussion at the time of the MSI application, as well as at the time when the award was finalized between McMaster and CFI. And I don't know that this has necessarily been communicated to everybody, so I'll just give a little excerpt from an email that we had received from CFI at that time. Our contribution agreement is crystal clear on the matter. This is simply not permitted. Recognizing that unlike CIHR and SHRC, who provide grant funds to individual researchers, we make contributions to an institution for well-defined projects. So that is an excerpt from an email, some email correspondence between McMaster and CFI. So they're definitely drawn a very solid line in the sand that StatsCan bill cannot be an eligible expense for the MSI. So I do want to clarify that for a few of the institutions that have asked us about that. I will go on to say, there has been some email correspondence, there have been some phone calls. So we have gone a few times to ask this question. At this point, I think it is clear to say this is not an eligible expense, so we can't recognize it on any of the MSI funding, and we can't recognize it as an institutional contribution. So pass back to Jennifer.
Thanks, Dave. So now I'm just going to walk you guys through an example of how to complete the Schedule D MSI reporting template. So you would have received an updated Schedule D Excel file along with the allocation letter that was sent out in September. I also had just resent this to all the research finance offices on Friday, February 22nd. Firstly, we'll start with completing the CFI cash portion of this claim. So the 2018-19 allocation was determined for your institution and the subsequent expense categories following the percentage breakdown that we saw on the previous slide. So just something to note, for institutions receiving less than the $10,000, the percentage distribution does not apply, and your template will only have the allocation amount completed in the 2018-19 CFI fund cell for the budget and actuals at the top there. So also something to note is if you have a carry forward balance from the previous year, so our first year 2017-18, this has been added to the actual CFI funds for 2018-19. It's just the right of your spreadsheet, the highlighted yellow column on your Schedule D. Your budget, you'll see on the left, is the same, and your actuals and forecasts on the right. The actuals column for 2017-18 will show a net dollar value at the bottom of an amount in that column if you have a carry forward. So for this year's reporting, you'll be completing the highlighted yellow actuals 2018-19 column. Your expenses will be inputted into the categories which must equal the total funds allocated to you at the top. So those institutions with carry forward balances will notice that their Schedule Ds, their own Schedule D, that their carry forward has been added to the actuals. We hope that you will please spend the full 18-19 allocation as well as any carry forward that you may have. This particular example does not depict that scenario, but you will notice on your own Schedule Ds if you have that carry forward amount. You might also see, for those that do have carry forwards, that your ending net value does not equal 0. Don't worry about this at this time. We just wanted to show a clear carry forward amount at the end of 17-18, and we'll fix this imbalance once your reporting submitted for 18-19. We also ask that you don't complete the forecasting at this time. I know some did last year, however, we'll be reviewing that once we have actuals submitted. So once you've completed the CFI cash portion of your claim, you can see the next slide, or tab 2 in your Excel workbook called Contributions. Reporting must also be completed. So the example I have here is based on a 40-60 split for CFI cash and institutional contribution. As I previously mentioned, we will be sending out a communication to the institutions as to what the amount of the institutional contribution you should be reporting is in the next couple weeks. So many of you will have just a 0 amount here, but we have tried to include what your last year's contribution is for the actuals for 2017-18. So we ask that you please only complete the first row entitled, in this example with the capital letters, university name, under the Other Contributions Institutional heading. This is where the contribution match is from your institution. The other headings, federal, government, provincial, have already been earmarked and are reported by McMaster for the federal portion, and there are some specific institutions that are reporting the provincial matches. Similarly, the same for the corporation's in-kind contribution and user fees. So please complete the expense portion of this schedule as shown on the right of the screen with how your institutional match was spent. Similar to how you reported your CFI cash spent, the same rules and guidelines apply to what is eligible to report on the matching side. Please reference your allocation letter for some examples of what types of expenses can be reported. And for eligibility, please refer to the MSI Oversight Framework document found on the CFI's website. If there's anything that you're unsure of, please do not hesitate to contact myself either by email or a phone call, and I'll try my best to clarify. And then just one final note, when reporting your matching pieces to us, McMaster will be reporting on the utilities line using square footage we've compiled from the RDC site, as well as using the CFI utility rate. So please don't include this in your costs. Also, as Dave has spoken to previously, the same CFI cash eligible expense rules apply with regards to Statistics Canada expenses. Any expenses associated with StatsCan cannot be reported as matching. And now Dave's just going to summarize some notes about reporting deadlines. And yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So, definitely want to mention here on this slide. So part of the reason that we've adjusted the reporting date from May 15th to May 1st, it's actually driven by the midterm review that's coming up. And we want to ensure that CRDCN is in the best possible position, so that, of course, we're getting the annual release of funding from CFI, but also we want to be able to build a case for a potential budget increase, as every MSI project will be looking to do this. We, of course, want to be able to demonstrate the same. So the importance of this and really critical side here is that we demonstrate that the funding that has been available to us in years 1 and 2, that we are spending our dollars and we are actively engaged in this MSI project right now. So definitely the more expenses that we can show that we've spent, the better position that's going to put us in for the future. But recognize that we are doing this webinar on March 4th, and we're talking about a reporting period that ends March 31st. So we do hope that you've been carrying on through the activities of 18-19. If there are some expenses that cannot get through by March 31st, our second best bet is that we can extensively write about here is the plan to make use of these funds, and how quickly we'll be able to utilize them and the benefits that will come from using that money. We also want to stress, and which part of this webinar today is about just the strong links and communications between the academic directors and the research finance offices, so that everyone is aware of the financial picture, and then, of course, coming back to us here at McMaster. So yeah, I think that really speaks to it. Of course, because this is a midterm review and collecting this data towards the beginning of May, we want to start compiling this so we really do understand what variances that we may have on the overall budget, where we are in terms of variances by the categories. So that is the reasoning that we've asked to bump up that reporting date. But I really do want to stress that the expenditures, we want to put ourselves in the best position that we can for making a request for additional funding. So that's definitely on the financial side. I'll now turn it over to Martin to speak a little bit more about the midterm review.
Thanks very much, Jennifer and Dave. This will be quite brief. I just wanted to bring both the academic directors and our university staff folks on the line as well to what is required of us for the midterm review. It's being conducted by CFI, so it's midterm in the context of the CFI funding over 5 years, 2017 to 2022. But it's important, I think, to keep in mind the fact that CFI and our two councils who fund us, SSHRC and CHR, in essence are working in tandem now in terms of performance reporting. So what goes into the midterm review for CFI purposes will also be an important part of the evaluation that CHR and SSHRC is doing on an ongoing basis. So what this slide shows you is the basic timeline that we have to meet, some of which has already gone by and has been fulfilled. So June 15th, 2018, so last year, we submitted what was our first annual performance report for that year that Jennifer and Dave have been referring to, of 2017-18. And that performance report involved a fairly substantial written report together with a financial report. And also within that period, we had to respond to any conditions that pertained to our award in the first instance. Suffice to say that those June 15th and October 31st deadlines there last year were both met, and met with full satisfaction with regard to CFI. So we are in good order as far as CFI, and indeed through CFI also with CHR and SSHRC. So we're not in a position then of having conditions still on our funding. Those have been met, and the annual performance report for last year was satisfactory, which is the highest rating one gets. So that's okay. January 31st, 2019, so just a month or so ago, we had to submit and did submit a list of suggested reviewers for the midterm review. These are primarily international folks because given the network that we're part of and its national coverage, not surprisingly, Canadian researchers by and large are disqualified by reason of the fact that either directly or somewhat indirectly they have connections with our network. And so this is fundamentally a list of international reviewers, as it indeed has been in the past, as we've had international reviews of our applications. Then the next several items on that list are due by June 15th of 2019, and this is what Dave and Jennifer have both referred to. So we do have to then submit another substantial annual performance report, which covers the period 18-19, so the fiscal year that we're just about to end on March 31st, 19. And it really is those two performance reports, both the substantial written report as well as the financial reports, that then become the core of the materials that are reviewed by the panel reviewers for this midterm assessment. That has built into it an important two-page executive summary, a list of key publications that we have produced through the network since the start of the grant in 2017. And then again, as Dave and Jennifer have referenced, an updated budget, and if it's applicable, as we hope and think it will be, a request for possible increased funding for 2020-22. The background to this is that in the last federal budget in March 2018, funds were allocated to CFI that were targeted towards the MSI program, with the possibility then of some incremental funding for those major science initiatives across the country, of which there are 17, to receive modest additional funding if indeed the case could be made. And as has already been mentioned, that case is obviously much strengthened if we can demonstrate that the funds that have already been at our disposal have been exhausted. And the last thing on that list there, which we're well along in doing, is that we provide, if applicable, which it is in our case, an updated strategic plan of the facility. So we've evolved a lot over the time period since this award was granted. And so we do think it's appropriate to provide to our reviewers an updated strategic plan. And that will indeed be part of the package on June 15th. And a draft of that strategic plan is coming to our upcoming board meeting on March the 26th for initial review prior to its finalization. So that gives you, I think, a good background. And just to complete that, there are some implications stemming from this midterm review that include the financial reporting but go beyond them. And I just wanted to take this opportunity, particularly with our academic directors on the line, to underline the importance of the researcher survey, which has been in the field now for a few weeks. And we're very grateful, obviously, for the responses that have come in. We are trying to ensure, especially this year, that it's as complete a submission as possible of the results coming from approximately 1,800 active researchers across the country. And so we appreciate the efforts that the academic directors are making to reach out to those researchers who are still in the process of completing that survey. It's of critical importance because a number of the key performance indicators that are built into our annual reports depend on that survey being completed accurately and fully. So the output reporting then, in terms of completeness, accuracy, and the timeliness, is obviously key to developing those statistics around our key performance indicators. And then in addition, we do obviously, through not only the researcher survey, but the academic director's annual reports, glean information on the outcomes and impacts of some of the research that's been conducted in the form of some vignettes or stories that highlight some of the major contributions that the researchers made, which obviously advance knowledge, but beyond advancing knowledge, in a number of cases are informing key areas of public policy for Canada. And in that regard, then, we are asking our ADs to submit those reports by May 1st, because there's a big consolidation job that we have to do at our end in order to mine those reports, to derive from them the vital information, so that, again, by the June 15th deadline, which is not a negotiable deadline, it's a fixed deadline, that we can put in the strongest possible performance report for 18-19. And as we've already mentioned, the financial reporting is equally a critical part of what that midterm review requires of us, per the previous slides that Jennifer and Dave have taken us through, with then again a May 1st deadline for their completion. So I think we're at the point then we can entertain your questions. That's a lot of information. I realize with the CFI program in particular, the requirements of demonstrating where the matching contributions to the CFI cash are coming from is not always a particularly easy task, and we want to make it as transparent and clear as possible to you through this and communication and related communications that we're making, so that we can assist you in completing this task. So I'm going to stop there, and we entertain your questions. I think we're just about on the schedule we'd hope to be, with around 25 minutes available for Q&A. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, so we have a few questions on the sort of typed question module, but of course, if you are interested in asking your question in person, just raise your hand and I will try to do that in order. So the first question that we have is, do you need the carry forward dollars to be spent by June 15th, or do we just need to report our planning by then?
So ideally, we are spending our carry forward from year 1 to year 2, and then we're spending year 2 as well. So I'm going to say that's the gold star. If that is not possible, practical, I think definitely identifying that, spending as much as you can, but then identifying what your game plan is to spend that as quickly as possible, so that we have something that we can speak to and incorporate as Martin and the team are putting forth the pitch for CRDCN.
Okay, so we have a question from Kelly. Kelly, I've unmuted you. Go ahead and ask your question. Sorry, Kelly? Going once, going twice. Okay. So the next question is, for institutions receiving less than $10,000, you said that the allocations don't apply. For those who received more than $10,000, can we spend up to $10,000 on any one?
Okay, so I think the significance of the $10,000 is that for those that are less than $10,000, we haven't necessarily identified where within the eligible expenses what your budget is for that $10,000. For those that are above $10,000, yes, we will be distributing that in terms of the personnel, minor upgrades, supplies, and training. We do want you to spend as close to the budget as possible. While some deviation can be possible, we are compiling 30 different institutions, and it's very difficult. At the end of the day, we need to be pretty close to what our breakdown by expense category should be in total. If you are looking at things and you need to deviate, we do please ask that you speak to us ahead of time. Our first message is to spend according to the budget distribution. If that is not a possibility or there is a unique situation, please contact us ahead of time so that we can discuss it to be that case. So I hope that helps address that question.
So it might also help address a follow-up question from somebody else. Is there any type of variance that's acceptable between budget lines, as it's tough to spend exactly to budget?
So this one, I'll say I do have a question waiting to hear back from CFI, just to give us full clarity on this matter. I can say that with this budget, we are definitely very high on personnel, which kind of makes sense with the type of project that this is, but it is also something that I've heard CFI kind of make some comments about. So I just want to make sure that we don't load up the personnel without kind of some movement between expense categories without some explanation and rationale. I am going back to the CFI to get some clarity to say, if as long as we are spending in what is most appropriate for us to execute and deliver on what we need to do, as you need to do at each of your locations, and we're fulfilling the what's expected of the CRDCN, will that be deemed to be acceptable? Right now, we're operating that small minor deviations would be acceptable. I will communicate further though as I hear more from CFI.
So if I can add a comment there, Dave, one thing we did do and successfully was after we had submitted the 2017-18 reports, in doing the forecasts for the subsequent budget years, beginning with 18-19, we were successful in getting some adjustment in the percentage distribution across those major line items. So in fact, and I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but the slide that you saw earlier, which shows 60% allocated to personnel, 30% to minor upgrades, 18% to admin supplies, 9% for training, that current percentage breakdown is somewhat different from the breakdown at the time we made the original application. And it does favor, Dave, as you're implying, the personnel category already. So we were successful in making that budget adjustment based on what we were hearing back from you in terms of the categories in which you could most effectively spend. But Dave's making an excellent point that we can't just keep pushing that up such that it's 100% on personnel and 0 on everything else, just to push it to the exaggerated limit there.
Is that it, Martin?
Yep.
Okay. So the next question is, on one of your slides, I guess SSHRC and CIHR were under contributions, and this question is about why that's the case if they're not eligible. And the questioner says that funding is specifically for the StatsCan bill.
So the answer there is very simple. We yes, send out almost, well, not almost, we send most of the funding from CHR SSHRC to help defray local costs of the StatCan bill. We do, though, retain a certain small proportion of that funding centrally to support central operating and management expenses. The breakdown has been roughly 2.54 million annually going to the centres, and around $360,000+ staying central. And it's that portion that supports central and management that is an eligible contribution. And so that's coming from centre. The RDCs themselves, as Jennifer pointed out, and the partner universities do not have to worry about that piece because that is indeed something we handle centrally. It's a very good question, but there's a very straightforward answer to it.
Okay, so the next question is, I'm not exactly sure why we have this CFI money, why we need to spend it in such narrow categories, and why we need to spend it all right now. And this is for someone who became an AD after the CFI application was done.
Okay. So one of the conditions, I'll answer this. One of the conditions on our 5-year CHR Shirk Award was that we demonstrate a sustainable budget over the full period of that CHR Shirk Award. When that application went in, it showed a very substantial deficit at the end of 5 years if additional funding was not secured. So when I came in as executive director 3 years ago now, my first task working with the team here was to put together a CFI application that would enable us to balance the budget over that 5-year period. And the funding that we've brought in from CFI, particularly the cash portion of that, does exactly that. So frankly, had we not had the CFI funding, our CHR Shirk funding would have been in jeopardy beyond year 1 because we had an unsustainable budget.
Okay, and can you also, Martin, explain more about required partner contribution? The questioner is not sure where that's outlined.
Okay, so this takes us to the basic structure of CFI awards. So whereas in the case of CHR and Shirk, that's 100% funding, so every dollar comes to us without any requirement for any kind of contribution from other sources. In the case of CFI, as I'm sure all of our partner universities are well aware, those essentially are all structured around 40 cents maximum from CFI on each dollar and 60 cents coming from partner contributions. The same at this point in time applies to the MSI program. So for every 40 cents of CFI cash, we have to find and demonstrate across the system that we are putting 60 cents of contributions coming from other contributors, or 40% to 60%. So it's a fundamental structural requirement of the CFI program across all of its programs, including the MSI.
Okay, so this question is a long one. Our CFI account at UBC seems to have the full amount of the grant transferred to us, but with varying allocations in each year depending on our dyad. This year, for example, it was lower than in the original budget estimates that served as the basis for transferring funds to us. Are we expected to refund money to the central CRDCN?
So the answer to that is no, in terms of basic answer. So that allocation year by year, as I guess the question implies, depends on how the allocation formula is generated. We do not report to CFI directly the amount going to each RDC. That's an internal issue based on the allocation formula. They know we use an allocation formula. We're transparent about that. They do not require us to report partner institution by partner institution. What Jennifer, Dave, and the staff here do, together with our team, is to consolidate all of those 30 reports into a single system-wide report. And so what that means is that your individual allocation year by year will depend on the data coming out of the researcher survey and the academic director's report for that previous year. So any anomaly in one year doesn't necessarily translate into what will happen in subsequent years. It all depends on the data for that year that has just passed. So in this case, obviously, the data that's now being accumulated for 18-19 will determine the allocation for 1920.
Just a note on that as well, for the CFI MSI reporting, the funding is distributed based on a cost recovery basis. So you would not receive the full funding up front. You'll receive each year once you submit your claim. So last year, those who submitted their Schedule D would have received what they spent as per their claim, and which will similarly be happening this year as well.
Okay, so another one from UBC. How should we claim our bills from our network service providers since they are apportioned differently in the billing than our fiscal model?
Do you want to repeat the question, Grant, please?
How should we claim our bill from our network service providers since they are apportioned differently in the billing than in our fiscal model?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I'd prefer to deal with it offline.
We'll follow up with that one offline.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question: what kind of training costs do you expect to see?
That's a very good question. So we have pushed again back to CFI on this one as much as we reasonably can. We recognize that there are two levels essentially of training that are involved across our system. One is the more technical training, which is what do you need to know about the basic software and to some degree hardware, and this will become all the more the case as we roll out the high performance computing system. So that more technical training. And then there's the more substantive training in terms of working with supervising in the case of graduate students around the particular research that they're conducting. If CFI takes a very strict line on this, then it would limit it to just the technical training. What do you need to know in order to effectively access the research data center, to sit at the front of a terminal and do what you need to do? We have been pushing back as much as we reasonably can to say to them, we are not the Canadian Light Source. We are not Snow Lab. We are not Ocean Networks Canada. In other words, some of the other big science facilities where there's a particular type of technical training that's needed to use a beamline, for example, at the Canadian Light Source. We don't really have the equivalent of that. So we're trying as far as we can to push the boundary and liberate the understanding of what those training costs are. To include then workshops that are provided at the RDC or in some cases centrally that are being given by university personnel. We can't pay, again here, for Stats Canada personnel who are delivering those. And that can also include training costs and expenses to attend workshops that might be given at the annual conference and other more perhaps regional types of activities. Again, it goes back a little bit to what I said earlier about us having argued for successfully the distribution of costs across these categories. The training category, which is now at 9%, was somewhat higher initially, and when we realized and heard back from a number of our partner universities that given some of the restrictions on how training was being defined, then we needed to reduce that down in order for that funding to be spent at all. So we have done that, but we are still trying to liberate even within that 9% as much as we can.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Form 300 reporting, it was mentioned that CIHR and SSHRC reporting and that it's important to show full costs. Are the costs of the StatCan overage being reported here to CIHR and SSHRC? The amount we are covering for this is way more than what we are receiving.
For the Form 300, where you're reporting your expenses to the amount of CIHR and SSHRC funding that you're receiving.
So the other question is, you indicated that we should not report utility costs on our reports. Are you reporting our institution's utility cost based on square footage?
Yes, that's exactly what we are doing.
Yeah, and we've got detailed information for each of your sites, which allows us to know what the current square footage is. So it saves you the effort of having to do that. It's simpler to do it centrally, and to some extent, I think Jennifer and Dave, I'm right in saying that the formula that's used varies depending on the particular type of facility in each place.
Yes, as well as the province.
Province, yeah. So it's much easier for us to do it centrally on that line than for you to have to delve into all of that complexity.
Okay, can you clarify the comments about cost recovery? Based on our accounting, it seems we have the full amount of our CFI funds on the books, and that's from UBC again.
Okay, so for the CFI funding, typically it's been that incur the cost, submit the financial report to us, and then we will disperse the funds back out to you. So if you do have full funding ahead of time, then that might be something that we'll take offline, and we can follow up with you directly.
Okay, so that is the end of the questions that I have here. I got to thank you for that answer. So that's the list of questions I have here. Is there anything else that anyone's wondering? I'm just having a quick look for hands. I don't see anything there either.
Grant, let me simply say, if we're coming to a conclusion, how much we appreciate the number of people who have attended. So we've got 52, I think, currently on the line across the country. You'll appreciate that for us centrally, there is a healthy challenge, I'll put it that way, of consolidating reports coming in from 30 institutions in all of the local complexity that they obviously involve. And we hugely appreciate the level of effort that's going in, both by way of the academic directors and, of course, by the financial staff, especially those who are on the phone today. We realize that these are relatively tight timelines, but I hope we've made it clear as to why these are not ones we're imposing centrally, but rather are ones that are coming to us through our funding agencies. And let me end on a positive note, because you know, it's easy to lose sight of the wood for the trees here, I think, in terms of this kind of webinar. I mean, if you look at the bottom lines of what's coming to us from SSHRC and CHR, $14.5 million over 5 years, and in terms of the CFI MSI, with the matching contributions built in, somewhere in the order of $17 million, you begin to appreciate how successful the network has been in terms of demonstrating its value to the research community and, quite frankly, to the country. These funds don't come in easily. They're highly competitive. And I want to thank you all for being part of increasing our competitive edge and ensuring that this level of funding, if not more, is sustained. Thank you so much.
Sorry, we've got one more question maybe while we're still all here. I'd like to know how the IF project will fit into this thing.
So I'll answer that one. So the IF project will be dealt with essentially separately from all of the funding that we've been talking about today. There's one slight reservation, qualification on that, but it's a detail that I don't think we need to get into. So the IF project is fundamentally an infrastructure build project as opposed to an operation and management project. It obviously does involve a lot of matching funding, but in that case, we've been singularly successful in bringing in matching funding from provincial research funding agencies. And so there is not the same requirement from the local sites to do the kind of matching contribution that is involved with the MSI project. So stay tuned for that in terms of how that will roll out, but it is indeed a very different kind of project with a very different funding structure associated with it. So, but a very good question.
Sorry, Martin, specifically the IOF dollars that are generated by the IF project, is there a more specific answer?
Yes, there is. So that's the little qualification I said. So what CFI have required us to do is to actually integrate what is a relatively modest amount of IOF funding into the MSI funding, because that's the only portion of that high performance computing project which is operating. So it went by probably quite quickly in an early slide, but I believe Jennifer and Dave, we did show in the budget forecast in one of the big slides early on. You'd have to go further back than that, Grant.
Yeah.
Is it that one? Yes. So you can see, if you're looking at it, beginning in 1920 and through the subsequent 2 years, there's $161,000 running through there for a total of $483,816 on the right-hand side. So there are 3 years of operating funding that is integrated. So there is a small amount that will be required to match that, and we've got a plan in place for that. That does not apply to 18-19. So I don't think we need to get into that in detail today. It does not apply to your 18-19 funding because it does not start to get used until 19-20. But thank you for the question. Somebody's being very observant, so that's great.
Okay, I think that's it for questions, unless Graham, you've been sending a lot of messages, but is there a question that goes along with any of these? Only if I want to comment. Okay, maybe we'll follow up with you after. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Grant. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jennifer.
All right.
Right on time.
All right, perfect.